want you to think for a second about the fact that we used to carry around devices to do different things in our daily lives. We didn't always have these smartphones in our pockets that did everything we needed. I really think about this all the time for whatever reason, so I decided to make this video about it. Think about like old single-purpose cell phones, PDAs, iPods, all these types of things. Each one of these things and other devices that I am forgetting at this point did things that we use our smartphones for now. Most reporters carried around dedicated voice recorders to record interviews and statements from politicians and athletes, including ones that body slam reporters and other ones that try to intentionally contaminate reporters with a deadly virus that there's no cure for. Of all this different stuff, I have a soft spot for music players. Even after smartphones started to take off a little bit, iPods and other music players kind of hung around for a little bit because whether it was having bad reception or small amounts of storage on your phone, you never really knew if, having an offline cache of music on an MP3 player would come in handy. And most of the time it did. So I wanted to take this chance to kind of take a look back at the journey of MP3 players through the years and kind of throw in some of my own personal experiences as well. Now, this stuff was really pioneered in the 80s from a tech perspective, but kind of like the internet itself, didn't really see the light of day in most people's lives until late 90s. In 1997, a company called Seihan released the first consumer-grade MP3 player called the MP Man. Now, as we all know, not long after that idea picked up steam, Apple came out with the first iPod. They were pretty early on the scene. Through the years, these were regarded as the best hardware for this market segment. I didn't jump on board until a little bit later, but I was able to see this kind of progressing over time. The coolest thing to me about iPods was at the time, over the years, Apple was jumping into or creating new product categories within the iPod family. Even if they weren't the first to think of an idea or a concept, they typically improved on it if they were not the first there. To accommodate people who wanted to watch portable video on a really small screen, they came out with the Classic and the Video. And those worked for a while and ran with regular classic spinning hard drives. For people more interested in taking their music on the go or in the car or what have you, came out with the iPod Nano. They had like 30 generations of it, and by the end they pretty much gave up and released the same thing twice in 2012 and 2015. And then of course for people less concerned about functionality and features and all that, they had the Shuffle. You could run with it. It was easy to take around, didn't even have a screen. And they really didn't iterate much on it over the years. It was pretty much the same thing the whole time it was out, and they just kind of changed the way it looked. It's interesting to me to look back at this timeline and kind of see over the years as Apple tries so hard just to try different ideas and categories and things like that to try to get every person to just buy some kind of iPod, something that fits their lifestyle. I'll jump ahead a little bit past the first round of iPods or so. When I first decided to spend a little bit of money and get an MP3 player, it was off-brand. It was from Macy's, and when I was trying to find pictures of it for this video, I really couldn't find anything because all it pulled up was pictures of those iPods that were sponsored or featured in Macy Gray at the time. This thing was really small and it only had like 128 megabytes of storage, so it probably held like 30 songs or something. And looking back, that's kind of disappointing, even though I didn't really spend that much money on it, just because the smallest iPods at the time were like 4 gigabytes, I think. Looking back at pictures of these things now and kind of seeing discussions about them online, it seems like they were sold in a lot of stores as kind of the generic cheap MP3 player just for a store to have on the shelf. But there's a good chance you've recognized this as well. They're basically glorified flash drive. They have a cap on the end that pulls off and it just shows a USB stick. You plug that directly into the computer and you drag the music onto it. That's really all that there was to it at the time. There wasn't any proprietary syncing like iTunes would do with an iPod. My next stroke of genius was to buy a SanDisk Sansa. This was like one of the worst things I ever purchased. I'm pretty sure to this day my baseline blood pressure is elevated just because I owned this device. This thing would freeze up all the time. I had 3 of them that bricked. I had to RMA it 3 or 4 times. Eventually the last one worked for, a couple months before that one decided to give out. I don't really think they ever figured out what was wrong with these. They just kept trying to replace them for people. This thing frustrated me so much and broke my heart so many times that when I looked up this picture for this video, it triggered my fight or flight. I'm not kidding. A little bit later on, Microsoft came out with the Zune, trying to compete with the iPod, of course, as the big 2 companies in the space at the time, Microsoft and Apple. And they really had a solid product on their hands. People liked the way it felt, the way it worked, it was good, but coming out with something that might be 10% better than the default option being the iPod at the time, you don't really have a good chance to compete. I remember really wanting one of these when it came out. The interface was great, the navigation was great, and arguably better than the click wheel on most of the iPods at the time. And then when the second gen came out, I really liked it as well. You know, the interface was good, it was new, and it looked like what Windows Phone eventually became. It also had a fancy new zoom pad for navigation, so it was a touch-sensitive squircle, which I also just found out is a shape. It's real. But ultimately, the Zoom fizzled out, didn't do as well as it should have, and Microsoft had to cut its losses on that one. Now, since the iPod in general paved the way for iPhones, I kind of wonder if Zune had done well, if Windows Phone would have done well. Maybe we'd be looking at a different smartphone market today. Maybe there'd be 3 big OSs, Android, iOS, and Windows Phone. Or maybe somebody like iOS or Android would not have made it as far. Now, like I said earlier, most people agreed at the time that Apple was making the best music hardware when they came out with the iPod Touch in 2007. The release of the iPod Touch kind of signals a break in technology, and this is when stuff really starts to shift. While Apple's original plan was to cater to different needs with different types of devices, the iPod Touch coming out kind of says, hey, here's a small portable device that does pretty much everything that you would want to do on a mobile device in one package. Just buy this one. And they kind of had a point. You know, you could watch videos on it, you could play games on it, you could listen to music on it. Why would you buy something else? As they brought in new generations of the Touch, they added things like microphones and cameras to make these basically full-fledged communications devices outside of, cellular connectivity. But at this point, demand for the other iPods really dwindles, and that kind of explains why they stopped releasing actually refreshed versions of the other iPods over time. The iPod Touch being a smash hit like it was with the App Store and all that stuff was a really big part of solidifying the iPhone as a mainstream piece of technology. And really, you could say that by making the iPhone mainstream, the iPod Touch kind of helped all smartphones become mainstream and solidify their existence in our pockets. Providing a low-cost option to a new technology concept like the iPod Touch did for a single device concept is a really big deal, and it's bragging rights in terms of getting it out there and getting people to try it. Overall, I'm really thankful these devices consolidated the way they did. It's made my life simpler. And even now, in 2021, it's still crazy to think about carrying more than one device for music or navigation or anything like that. Even years after I last carried an iPod alongside my personal phone, I had to, at one point, carry a work phone with my personal phone. So having those 2 phones in my pocket was a really annoying dose of nostalgia. So never again. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you had any similar or different experiences from what I described in this video, let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done that already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.